soaked in wine, addressed to a vigilante named George Lusk. The note claimed the sender had fried and eaten the other half. By 1888, Whitechapel held roughly 80,000 people packed into a parish that had never been built to hold them. Irish immigrants had arrived decades earlier, swelling the East End, and from 1882 onward Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in the Russian Empire crowded into the same streets, the same courtyards, the same collapsing rowhouses. Work was scarce. Housing was worse. More than half the children born in the East End died before they turned 5. The Metropolitan Police estimated that Whitechapel contained 62 brothels and roughly 1,200 women working as prostitutes, women who had turned to the trade because there was little else standing between them and starvation. Every night, about 8,500 people paid to sleep in one of 233 common lodging houses scattered through the district. A coffin-sized bed cost 4 pence. If you couldn't afford that, you could pay 2 pence to lean against a rope stretched across a dormitory room and call that sleep. Tension didn't stay quiet. Between 1886 and 1889, demonstrations turned into police crackdowns, most infamously the clash later called Bloody Sunday in 1887. Anti-Semitism ran through the neighborhood's politics and its rumors alike. Crime, overcrowding, and a hardening nativism fed a public image of Whitechapel as a den of vice, an image that would only calcify once the murders began. The killings that made the district's name synonymous with horror weren't the first violence recorded there. On April 3, 1888, a woman named Emma Elizabeth Smith was attacked in Osborne Street, beaten, sexually assaulted, and injured so severely with a blunt object that she developed peritonitis and died the next day at London Hospital. She told police 2 or 3 men had attacked her. Most researchers now separate her death from what came after, filing it under ordinary East End gang violence rather than the work of a single killer. Then, on August 7, 1888, a woman named Martha Tabram was found dead on a staircase landing in George Yard. She had been stabbed 39 times, throat, lungs, heart, liver, spleen, stomach, breasts, and groin. Nearly every wound had been made by a right-handed attacker with a blade no larger than a penknife. The savagery of it, and its closeness in time and place to what followed, led police to wonder if this was where the pattern started. But Tabram's throat had not been slashed the way later victims' throats would be, and that single difference is enough that many experts still refuse to link her death to the man the newspapers would soon be calling by name. The killings that came to define the case, what investigators and historians call the canonical 5, began on August 31, 1888, when the body of Mary Ann Nichols was found in Bucks Row at roughly 3:40 in the morning. Her throat had been cut twice, deep enough to reach the vertebrae. Her abdomen had been opened. A week later, on September 8, Annie Chapman was found near the backyard steps of 29, Hanbury Street, her throat cut the same way, her intestines pulled out and arranged over her shoulder, her uterus removed entirely. A witness named Elizabeth Long said she'd seen Chapman alive around 5:30 that morning, talking to a man in a dark coat and a brown deerstalker hat. He'd asked her something. She'd said yes. On September 30, 2 women died within 3/4 of an hour of each other, a night the press would call the double event. Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutfield's yard with a single clean cut across her throat and no further mutilation, which has left researchers arguing ever since over whether her killer was interrupted mid-attack. Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square with her throat opened ear to ear, her intestines draped over her shoulder, her left kidney and uterus removed, and precise triangular cuts carved into both cheeks. The police surgeon estimated the mutilations alone took at least 5 minutes. A section of Eddowes's bloodied apron turned up later that morning in Golston Street, beneath a chalked message about Jews not being blamed for something, a line so inflammatory that the police commissioner ordered it washed off the wall before sunrise, destroying whatever evidence it might have held. The last of the 5, Mary Jane Kelly, was found on November 9 inside her own rented room at 13 Miller's Court. She had been eviscerated on her own bed. Her face was cut beyond recognition. Her heart was missing from the scene entirely. In the grate of her fireplace, investigators found the ashes of several burned items, enough heat, in fact, to melt the solder joining a kettle to its spout. More than 2,000 people were interviewed. Around 300 were investigated as possible suspects, and 80 were detained outright. Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline was pulled in from Scotland Yard after the Nichols murder. The city police joined once Eddowes turned up inside their jurisdiction, since Mitre Square sat just over the boundary line from Whitechapel proper. Investigators leaned hard on the theory that the killer had some anatomical skill, a butcher, a slaughterman, possibly a surgeon, and combed through 76 local butchers and slaughterhouses along with every employee who'd worked there in the previous 6 months. Queen Victoria herself floated the idea that the man might be a cattleboat worker passing through the London docks. Police checked the boat schedules. None of them lined up with the murder dates. The name, Jack the Ripper, didn't come from the police, or from any victim, or from any confirmed sighting. It came from a letter. The "Dear Boss" letter arrived at the Central News Agency on September 27, 1888, promising to clip the lattice ears off on his next outing. 3 days later, Catherine Eddowes was found with a portion of one ear cut through, though medical examiners believed that injury happened by accident, during the attack, not as some deliberate fulfillment of a threat. The letter is widely believed today to have been a hoax, quite possibly written by a journalist looking to keep newspaper sales high. A chief inspector later named a specific reporter, Tom Bullen, as the likely author. Decades afterward, in 1931, a journalist named Fred Best reportedly admitted that he and a colleague at the Star had written letters signed, Jack the Ripper, simply to, in his words, keep the business alive. And yet one piece of mail resists that easy explanation. On October 16, 1888, George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee opened a small box and found half of a human kidney inside, preserved in spirits of wine. The accompanying note, written in a hand entirely different from the "Dear Boss" letter, claimed the writer had fried and ate the other half. Eddowes had been missing her left kidney. A doctor at London Hospital, Thomas Openshaw, examined the organ and confirmed it was human and from the left side of the body, but contrary to sensational newspaper claims at the time, he could determine nothing more than that. Whether it belonged to Eddowes, or was a grotesque prank assembled by someone with access to a mortuary, has never been settled. What's clear is that two separate mysteries were tangled together from the start, a hoax that gave the killer his legend, and a piece of physical evidence that may or may not have come from an actual crime scene. The public didn't distinguish between them. Newspapers reprinted both as if they carried equal weight, and the name stuck regardless of which letter, if either, was real. No one was ever charged. Mary Jane Kelly's murder is generally treated as the last of the canonical five, and most researchers assume the killing stopped because the perpetrator died, was imprisoned for something else, was committed to an asylum, or left the country, though the Whitechapel murders file kept growing for years afterward, with 4 more deaths, including that of Francis Coles in February 1891, loosely tied to the case before investigators moved on. Sir Melville Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum named 3 suspects, but the evidence against each was circumstantial at best, and Macnaghten hadn't even joined the force until after the murders ended. More than a century later, researchers attempted to tie a Whitechapel barber named Aaron Kosminski to crime scene evidence using DNA analysis. The study could not be replicated, the original data went missing, and the Journal of Forensic Sciences eventually published a formal expression of concern about it. Over 100 suspects have been proposed in total, from local laborers to the painter Walter Sickert. None have held up. What the murders did leave behind was pressure that helped push the worst of Whitechapel's slums toward demolition within 2 decades. The 10 Bells pub on Commercial Street, once frequented by at least one of the 5 women, still stands. Walking tours still trace the same half-mile of streets. In 2015, a museum dedicated to the case opened in East London, drawing protest from the local mayor and residents who felt it turned 5 murdered women into a tourist attraction. The kettle in Mary Kelly's fireplace is the detail that lingers. Someone stayed in that room long enough, working by firelight, to melt the solder holding its spout in place.